Perfect. There we are. Professor Marandi, how are you doing today?
I'm very good, Jamal. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining me. I always appreciate you joining me, just so the audience will know, even though I think the audience already knows who you are. Professor, there it is, Mohammad Marandi. He's professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Um, yeah, thank you for joining me this evening. So the reason why I brought you on had to do with a story that came out that Iran is forming a Supreme Security Council. And this is fusing, I guess, various elements of the security apparatus in Iran together to deal with security threats. Am I getting that correct?
Well, Iran has a Supreme National Security Council, and we have a new chair for that council. It's Dr. Ali Larijani, who is a professor at the University of Tehran, but he was also the Speaker of Parliament for 3 terms, and he was previously the chair of the Supreme National Security Council before.
Okay.
And he is, I think, a very competent person and a very good choice for this job. And I think it will be very good to have him in charge of this body. But within the framework of the Supreme National Security Council, you will have this council, and it is a smaller, let's say, group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's basically so that they can make any military decisions or key security decisions in time of war or in time of conflict or in time of threat of a conflict. They can make those decisions more easily, but also with greater secrecy. So within the framework of the Supreme National Security Council, you will have this council, this military council, and the president will be the head, of course. And my understanding is the chair of the Supreme National Security Council will also be chairing that, although I don't know exactly yet, but I think that's what will happen. And then you will have a small group of people who will be sitting together to make those decisions.
This puts me in mind of kind of like an allied command of sorts. But usually they form those things because they're prepared for conflict. Is that where Iran's head is now? And by the way, when I saw this, I thought this was a great idea. And the reason I thought it was a great idea is because you guys do have threats. And I understand that the government initially wanted to negotiate and everything else, but the reality of it is they weren't willing to negotiate. What Iran seems to have said, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that if Trump wants negotiations, then they need to compensate Iran for the damage that they did in the sneak attack as one of the, let's say, primary starting points for any negotiation. And there was one of the things, no attacks, which I don't know how Iran could ever accept again from the United States. Am I getting that right?
Yes, that is something that the foreign minister said. Although I would say, Jamal, that a lot of what is said online and what analysts are saying about how the current president and administration, they want to appease the Americans, I really don't think it's like that.
Please.
I do think that, yes, they are in general more towards, let's say, their general history, the history of the last couple of decades has been more moderate towards the West, more sometimes trusting towards the West. But I think that President Pezeshkian is very skeptical of the West. Sometimes he says things and then people take that, and instead of using the body of his speeches, he said so many other things, and then he is not a very careful speaker. He's not a professional politician. And so at times he says things that I think are not useful or not helpful, but that's not representative of what his position is, some of the things that are put out there. I mean, for example, the people who are calling him attacking him harshly, they said that his interview with Tucker Carlson was a catastrophe. I understand, I accept that his interview was not 100%, and I think he should have been more assertive when it came to speaking about the US government.
Right.
But he was speaking to an American audience. He was speaking to a Tucker Carlson audience. And he wanted, I think, to show them that it is not the Iranians who are aggressive. It's not the Iranians who are the problem, because the Americans are propagandized. I have nothing to do with his interview. I have nothing to do with his presidential office and his entourage. But I don't think it was that catastrophic. I think it could have been better. Definitely, I think some of the criticisms were valid.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was like terrible. So in Iran, you have these sort of extreme positions that some people take for or against the government. I think that at the moment there, and especially after the war, there is a consensus in Iran that we cannot deal with the United States in a sense that we can trust them or have an agreement and expect them to abide by that agreement, and expect the United States the U.S. government to recognize Iran's rights. So I would say, in general, the politicians in the country are far more skeptical of the United States today than they were, let's say, 3 months ago, and that includes the president. But the position taken by the foreign minister recently, the one that you alluded to, shows that Iran is taking a tougher position. But at the same time, Iran does not want to close the door to negotiations. And we discussed that before.
Right.
There are two reasons for that. One is, of course, there's always a chance where something may happen. So you don't want to close the doors. And because of our skepticism, by the way, we do not directly negotiate. We indirectly negotiate with the United States. But the second is that if the United States carries out an attack, or if the Israeli regime carries out an attack, or does something outrageous or foolish, no one can blame the Iranian government for not trying to prevent this from happening.
Yes.
And that was, I think, so when Trump sent a letter to Ayatollah Khamenei for negotiations, it was a very insulting letter, and he rejected negotiations. And then when the Americans sort of shifted, he allowed for indirect negotiations, but not where the Americans wanted to hold them. The Americans wanted, I think, the Emirates to be the mediator, and he chose Oman.
Right.
And that caused the Americans to, it put them in a dilemma. And it took them 2 weeks to respond and agree to negotiations. So we were not playing on the American or on Trump's playing field. We're playing on Ayatollah Khamenei's playing field. Indirect negotiations, and it's Oman instead of someone else that the Americans preferred. And as those negotiations were taking place, the Americans and the Israeli regime conspired and assaulted the country, and that created a huge wave of support for Iran across the world. And of course, inside Iran, it helped strengthen national unity, because it showed clearly that the United States was deceptive, that it was deceitful, and that it cannot be trusted. So I think that it was smart for us to negotiate, but not under those terms and conditions that Trump was seeking. And I think if there are going to be negotiations or indirect negotiations in future, it will probably be devised in that sort of way, so that Trump will not get what he wants, and at the same time, it will make the United States look aggressive and dishonest if something happens in future.
I remember what the second provision was. It was, if you are still going with this idea of no nuclear enrichment, then don't bother with negotiations. Like, effectively, you're going to have to pay reparations because you attacked us in bad faith. And two, if, as a premise of the negotiations, you need to acknowledge that nuclear enrichment is built into this process. Now, I guess my thing is,
Jamal, yeah, and I think this war, although it was destructive and it was a unprovoked war, an illegal war, and the Israeli regime carried out a blitzkrieg like the German Nazi regime that it mimics. Um, a lot of damage was done on
Yeah.
day one, in particular, obviously. But ultimately, Iran had the upper hand, and we saw, for example, how Trump admitted that the Israeli regime was taking a beating, and how Steve Bannon said that the real story here is that Trump saved the Netanyahu and the Israeli regime because they were losing. They were taking a bad beating by the Iranians. But in addition to that, the U.S. strike on Iran ended up catastrophically. First of all, contrary to what Trump said and claimed that none of the missiles hit their targets in Qatar,
Yes.
they did.
Yes.
And we have evidence of that, and that the strike was very devastating and costly for the United States. But more important than that is the fact that the United States and the Israeli regime gave Iran a gift. And that gift was a policy of ambiguity. From now on, the United States and the Europeans and the Israeli regime will not know what they would seek to know about Iran's nuclear program. Iran has expelled the International Atomic Energy Agency for good reason. And now it's unclear what Iran is doing. And Iran is being more careful in general about information nowadays. Things have changed, as we see with the Supreme National Security Council and certain and the new way in which the decision-making process is being devised. So this policy of ambiguity serves Iran's interests. And in addition to that, this negotiation, the negotiations that Iran carried out within the framework that Ayatollah Khamenei devised, strengthened Iran's position globally. And so right now, while there was damage, they murdered hundreds of innocent people
Yes.
and hundreds of soldiers and public servants. That's obvious, and they destroyed. They caused a lot of material damage. They lost the war. The damage to the Israeli regime was greater, but more importantly, the image of the United States and the Israeli regime took a battering, and Iran has now this policy of ambiguity, which is a very important playing card to have.
Why? And I'm asking
Well, because
seriously. Like, is it the belief? Well, yeah. I'll just ask it flat. Why do they believe it's very important playing?
well, first of all, we don't even know what sort of, I mean, we don't know what sort of damage has been caused in Isfahan
Agree.
and Natanz and Fordo, and we won't know, and the Americans won't know, and the International Atomic Energy Agency won't, and they won't know if Iran is building new installations or where they're building. They won't know what Iran has or what new centrifuges, because a lot of the centrifuges in these facilities were like IR1s. They were very old centrifuges. Now Iran has uh, much more advanced centrifuges. The industry has moved forward rapidly, and they don't occupy a lot of space, and they can be moved around very easily without being damaged, because the older centrifuges were very sensitive.
Mhm.
But the newer ones, because they have sensors and the technology is, way much more advanced, it's more easy to move them around to enrich in smaller places. So now the United States has no idea what we have, where we have it, and what we're doing, and they brought it upon themselves by weaponizing the International Atomic Energy Agency, by carrying out uh, illegal attacks on Iran, by the West and collective West supporting aggression against Iran and its civilian nuclear sites.
Right.
So that policy of ambiguity with regards to Iran's nuclear program makes it more easy for Iran to develop that program, and it makes the West it much more difficult for the United States and the West to formulate any sort of policy, whether it's political or whether they want to, let's say, again think of striking Iran. It will be much more difficult for them to find targets and to figure out if those targets were uh, damaged or not, or whether they are struck the right targets. So that ambiguity, I think, is a big plus for Iran.
Yeah.
Remember, Jamal, before the war that the Israeli regime carried out, the 12-day war of aggression, Iranian public opinion was about 50-50,
Right.
according to polls, on obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Right.
And the reason why it was 50-50 was because the government policy and the state policy was not to have nuclear weapons. So a portion of Iranian society that was opposed to it was influenced by the dominant government discourse. When the government says, look, we don't need nuclear weapons, a segment of society will say, okay, then we don't need nuclear weapons. After the war, although the Iranian government position has not shifted that much, although increasingly they speak about, there's an existential threat against the country. We could develop nuclear weapons. And one of the people, by the way, who said that was the new chair of the Supreme National Security Council, Dr. Larijani. So the discourse has changed, in a subtle way. But because of the nature of the Blitzkrieg attack and the way in which the West supported the slaughter of people and the way in which the Western media supported this aggression, that itself has shifted public opinion. So now a strong majority of Iranians support developing a nuclear weapon. That's not the policy of the government. And I don't think I'm confident that the Iranians are not building a nuclear weapon. But the point that I'm making is that with this political force, these shifting sentiments among ordinary Iranians, and this ambiguity that now exists, and the statements made by senior officials, including the new chair of the Supreme National Security Council, that is something that basically makes what the actions of the United States and the Israeli regime harmful, extremely harmful for their own objectives with regards to Iran.
Agreed. Agreed. Because what they wanted to do was create so much chaos that they destabilized the government itself. I mean, the attacks that they were doing were decapitation strikes to try to take down scientists, military, political, I mean, even going after Pezeshkian. And with this idea that there was going to be this upswell and this overthrow. And instead of doing that, they solidified the Iranian political space and even increased the number of people that are saying, we need nukes. We need nukes to defend ourselves. Yeah, that's a backfire. It didn't work that way. Do you think we're in World War?
So not only do you have this shift in public sentiment and this ambiguity with regards to Iran's nuclear program, but you have a population that has hardened with regards to the West,
Yes.
that is much more united than before. You have a younger generation that was to a large degree influenced by Western narratives that have shifted in their political sentiments and become much more skeptical of the West, if not hostile, and definitely very hostile towards the Trump and the Israeli regime. But in addition to that, in addition to these elements, you also see this happening within the broader global context. The war in Ukraine is intensifying. The front line is collapsing. The United States is becoming more desperate in a way. I mean, the new threats made against Russia, and then 50 days going down to 10, 12 days, and then the 8th of August. You see the United States overwhelmed with multiple crises. You see the problems arising because of Epstein, which are not going to go away. And my belief is that we're going to get more information gradually come out, and this is going to become increasingly problematic for Trump. I mean, I'm not an expert on Trump, but it's quite stunning how nervous Trump has become, and how like he's so adamant about just rejecting any debate on Epstein, whereas he's always been able to, uh, you know, he's they. I remember um, in the UK, the Prime Minister, uh, uh, Tony Blair, they would say he is Teflon Tony, and that nothing would stick back then.
Uh-huh.
Of course, the Iraq War destroyed his image and credibility, but in general, they would call him Teflon. They often called him Teflon Tony. And Trump was sort of like Teflon. No matter what they threw at him, he always was able to, survive.
Agree.
But his demeanor and his language was always very confident. But when it comes to Epstein, we see how he wants to shut down the debate, and that's different. And so in any case, the issue of Epstein is not going to go away. And then you have the tariff war, and now the threats against India and Brazil, which really weren't primary targets
China.
in the past. So
Yeah.
this is, well, China, of course. But so now the Iranians see that while they have a stronger hand, as we discussed, but also the United States is in a much more difficult situation. And the situation for the United States is becoming increasingly difficult because it's antagonized so many global actors. So I think that makes the Iranians feel more confident, although there are many challenges. Some of my Turkish friends get upset when I say this. I love the country Turkey, and people, they are very hostile towards the Israeli regime, but I have no respect for Erdogan and the Erdogan regime for reasons that I've said before.
Yeah.
He has been working against the resistance. He's been cooperating with the Israeli regime. He transports oil. All that aside, in Lebanon, we're seeing the same thing, but the Saudis and the Americans and the Israelis are working together to put pressure on the resistance. So while there are challenges, and we see regional players in the American camp, Erdogan, Mohammed bin Salman, Mohammed bin Zayed, the Qatari regime, and among others, basically working to help the Americans. And so that is always going to be a huge challenge for the resistance. But we do see the United States, when we look at the bigger picture, facing bigger challenges. And the war between Iran and the Israeli regime, that strengthened Iran's hand. So when we look at the global situation and the way in which the war played out, despite the challenges in the region, I think it's fair to say that the position of the axis of resistance today is much stronger than it was a few weeks ago.
And the last question, what do you think happens with Israel? I mean, and do you think that requires a military solution in order to stop the genocide that's taking place? Or do you think, just give me your thoughts on this. I'm very curious. Because when you talk to different people, some people would say there's going to be a reckoning. Some people would say there's not going to be a reckoning. Some people would say there will be one state at some point. Some people would say, no, Israel, there will be no consequences for the behavior that they've taken in regards to murdering all of these people and starving these people, especially with the U.S. support behind it. How do you think this ultimately turns out from your point of view? And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but I'm just curious. You've studied this stuff for years.
Well, of course, it's impossible to predict the future, but I don't think that the Israeli regime will survive. I think it will collapse.
Now, why?
I'm not saying it will, I don't believe it. I'm not saying it's going to collapse in 1 month or 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. But the longer this genocide lasts, the longer this Holocaust lasts, the worse it's going to get for the regime. And now that they want to take the Gaza Strip, they're only going to slaughter more people.
Right.
And after 22 months of genocide, and it's been 22 months now, so we're moving into the 23rd month. After 22 months, Jamal, I mean, you were in the United States 22 months ago. Could you have ever imagined public opinion in the United States shifting the way it has when you used to work on your radio show, did
No.
you ever imagine that the United States, which is the most propagandized country in the world by far, did you think that sentiments, even though social media is working to help the Israeli regime, mass media is working to help the regime, the state has helped doing what it can, but public opinion has shifted. And outside of the United States, you know quite well what's going on.
Yes.
We saw huge protests in Japan. We saw huge protests
Australia.
in Australia.
Yeah.
We see so across the world, the regime is being is despised, and that has enormous consequences. And if every day that this continues, when you have people being just slaughtered on a daily basis for trying to get food, and then simultaneously you have these apologists who are trying to pretend that there's no hunger and no starvation, they are getting uh, discredited further. These Western officials and journalists on CNN or Fox News
Yeah.
or and elsewhere who are making, or the Wall Street Journal or the BBC, those who've been trying to claim that there's no starvation, they're only getting discredited further. So the West is weakening, and the West is weakening because of a declining economy. I mean, Europe. Look at Europe. They've destroyed their economy. They've shut the door to Russia. Then they refuse to do a deal with Iran because of the United States. When we had those nuclear negotiations, I was telling European elites to do a deal so you can invest in Iranian oil and gas and make up for some of the losses due to your sanctions on Russia. But when the United States failed to take that last step, I said, winter is coming. It's going to get bad for you. And it's been downhill for Europe ever since, for 3.5 years. And now they do this deal. Well, it's not a deal, it's a capitulation uh, with Trump. And they have nothing. So, and as Europe declines, is that good for Israel or bad for Israel? It's bad for Israel because the Israeli regime is not an independent regime.
Right.
It's completely dependent. That it's no superpower, it's no power. It's just a tiny stolen piece of land where the Europe and North America and the West is pumping in weapons and money and technology so that they can continue the slaughter. Well, the Western economies are going downhill. They're losing wars. They've created trade wars. Not just Trump, but the Europeans are just as foolish. They went and insulted the Chinese. They've closed the door to Iran. They've closed the door to Russia. Now they're closing the door to the Chinese. None of this is good for Israel. So the West, which backs the Israeli regime, is declining. Its fortune, its support among the public and the West is disappearing. It's hated across the board, and you do see clips of Israeli tourists, traveling and people, confronting them. I don't see this regime as lasting, and I don't see these governments in the region that have been treasonous in continuing to do business and with Israeli regime as being able to last forever, because the outrage in the region has just gone through the roof.
Yeah.
This is not a sustainable situation. We already see a lot of unrest in Egypt, and while the Turkish government is trying to push activists towards making protests against the Egyptians, but they too are complicit. And then there's Jordan, and then there's the Emirates, and then there's Morocco. But these governments or regimes that are in bed with the United States, they're being weakened by this continued genocide. So every day that this genocide continues, and then every day that the United States and the West continues to wage some form of war in some shape or form, whether economic or military war across the world, the fortunes of the West and the fortunes of the Israeli regime continue to decline. I just don't see this as sustainable. They will continue to slaughter women and children. Things will get worse in Gaza. They may attack Lebanon because right now there is a conspiracy against the resistance in Lebanon. The Saudis are pushing, and the Americans are pushing the government to
Civil war.
to confront the resistance and take their arms. in order to make Lebanon weak, because the Lebanese armed forces can never stand up to the Israelis. And then Erdogan's ISIS and Al Qaeda troops in Syria have already been used to attack Lebanon a number of times and threaten the resistance. So you see this large collaboration, this conspiracy right now taking place, where these different players under the authority of the United States are trying to target the resistance. So there are challenges, and there may be war, and the genocide and Holocaust will continue. But I just think that this downhill path that the Israeli regime is taking in the eyes of the world, and the weakening of the West in general, this is going to have consequences. And of course, as you know, Israel is deeply divided right now, not because half of the country is against
Right.
genocide. No, overwhelmingly they support this extermination of Palestinians, but according to polls. But because this country is deeply divided between two camps. So there are many things taking place simultaneously. None of it is good news for the Israeli regime.
Professor Marandi, always appreciate you, man. Always appreciate you. One day I need to get to Iran. Hopefully we can get coffee or something to that effect.
Definitely.
Thank you for this. Professor Marandi, or
Always a pleasure.
Professor Mohammad Marandi. He is professor of English literature and Orientalism at the University of Tehran. Well, wait, is that still correct? Do I still have that correct?
Yes, as far as I know, I have not been expelled from the university. So
Okay.
as far as I know, I still work. Unless you have news that I don't.
I do not have any additional news.
If you have any inside information, please let me know.
Thank you for this. You have a good day, okay? Be safe.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye. All right.
Thank you.
I always appreciate these conversations with Professor Marandi. Yeah, I always appreciate those conversations. All right. We have come to the end. We have come to the end. Let me go to chats to do these first before we close it. Yes, he was calling me a monkey. Esperak. Racist people be racist. He's really, I suppose. Shini, what is this? Sheena Nolan. Thank you, Sheena Nolan. You have my deepest appreciation. This is Bansa W. Bandi, I believe that is. Warwick is the man. Warwick was good this morning. Warwick was very good this morning. He gave an economic breakdown. That was fantastic. What is this? Good morning from Richmond, Virginia. Sir Bikes a lot. How are you? You're an RVA. You're an RVA. Badass. Badass. I will be going back there someday at the point where this one or two things happen. Either my body gives out or I just get tired of being a digital nomad. Either way, I will be back in Richmond at some point, even if it's just my cold, dead corpse. Guys, I want to thank all of you. I want to thank all of you that contribute. You have my deepest appreciation. You allow the show to be what the show is and allow the show to keep ticking along. You can support the content, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon. I think it's a Patreon. PayPal is one of the other ones. All of those things help, and you have my appreciation for it. I'm going to call this a day. You all have a fantastic evening, night, wherever you are. You be safe. And have a good one. Be safe, guys.